Oh, how I wish I was in Peoria, Peoria tonight. Oh, how I miss the mud in Peoria, Peoria tonight.
Are there any entrepreneurs here? Any shy entrepreneurs? There we go. All right, fine. You're a lot like me then. How about any whiskey lovers? Oh, all right. Well, you owe me.
Peorians or what?
Pardon?
I said, are we Peorians or what? Of course we're whiskey.
Excuse me, that's right. Actually, that's an obvious question. I always loved the adventure of being the first to accomplish something significant. Here in the city of Peoria, I was the first to build and operate a distillery, the first to operate a steamboat here, to provide a ferry that crossed the river, and also the first wooden wagon bridge. My name is Almiron S. Cole. I was born in Cheshire, Massachusetts in 1802. And believe it or not, in Cheshire, Massachusetts, there were two girls that were named Chloe Mason Brown. One had brown eyes and the other blue eyes. I fell in love with the one we affectionately called Blue-Eyed Chloe. And while I was in my 20s, I heard of the opportunities in Peoria. So I loaded up a wagon with general goods and I bought two big Norman horses and I left my wife and newborn son, Johnson, and I headed out west. Now it took over 5 months for the journey here to Peoria. But when I got here, I opened up a general store on Main Street. And soon I took in a partner, Mr. Gardner T. Barker. And Barker, even though he was a politician, he was a good man. And eventually he became the mayor of Peoria. And he was always grateful for the help that I gave him in his start in the community. Then in 1844, I embarked on the most prosperous business the city of Peoria would ever see. You know what that business was? Making whiskey, right. At the foot of Oak Street, I started to erect a distillery. Now, I was the first one to see the advantages that the Peoria area had for the distilling process. Here we were in the belt buckle of the Corn Belt. And crystal clear water flows from the very hills that we're standing on. And if you look about, the mighty oak tree stands plentiful and they make perfect whiskey barrels. Now back then, everyone, and I mean everyone, said that I would fail. You see, money was generally scarce and the city of Peoria was basically destitute of any banking facilities. I remember the historian George Balance wrote that my bankruptcy was just a matter of time. Well, I fooled them all. Yes, I did. I overcame my obstacles, I made money, and I paid off my debts. You see, I could buy a bushel of corn for 10 to 12 cents. And then I could sell a gallon of whiskey for 25 to 30 cents. And I would get 4 to 5 gallons of whiskey for every bushel of corn. That left me with a healthy profit. Now back then, there were no railroads, so I had to transport my whiskey using a steamboat. Again, my steamboat, the first of its class in the area, the Frontier. Now you may recall, or you may be acquainted with the name of Captain Henry Detweiler. Well, he was a cub pilot on the Frontier when it was rammed by the steamer Panama not far from here. And it was Detweiler's sharp thinking that saved the lives of all the passengers, the crew, and the cargo. I recognized his abilities and helped launch him on to being the most famous riverboat captain in the area. After about 2.5 years, I sold the distillery to a Southerner, a Mr. Sylvanus Thompson. Now here's another man that I helped start on his way to fame and fortune. Thompson stepped in and all the gold just ran into his coffers, and as the story goes, he became Peoria's first millionaire. Then in 1847, I bought the Liss farm near the river at the foot of Edmund Street. There I started to erect an even larger distillery. I I hewed the timbers for the framework with my own hands, and I excavated much of the foundation. It was 5 stories tall. It had a chimney 85 foot tall. It cost me $35,000, and it had 125,000 bricks. Financing it was difficult, though. And in 1849, when the gold rush excitement hit the country, I thought, that solves my money problems. Yes, I caught gold fever. I housed my timbers, and I bought a pair of oxen, and I ready to go out to California. But then I came about my senses. I saw the other opportunities here in Peoria. Back in that time, Peoria was expanding, and people were crossing over to the East Peoria side, and there was a need for a crossing. Now, before any bridge was built across the river, I operated a ferry to and fro. And then in 1849, I acquired the first wooden wagon bridge that crossed the river. And it would cost 5 cents for a person to walk across, 25 cents for a horse and carriage to go across, 50 cents for a team and wagon. I made $1,500 a month at the peak. But then I finally had enough money, and 4 years after I bought the property for the distillery, I started making whiskey in 1851. And then I found that the whiskey making business can be just a little bit too rewarding for some. See, at a warehouse, I hired a bunch of Irishmen. And you know what happened. I walked in and most of them were drunk. I was so angry I threw them out forcibly. And what I found was that they were drilling small holes in the whiskey barrels and they were drinking it with straws. Then they were knocking the rings of the barrels down to cover the holes. But then there were those that condemned the imbibing of spirits. I remember one very prominent temperance advocate here in Peoria that wrote, "Beware, fellow mortals," and he warned of the evils of whiskey, and he warned men not to fall under its influence. But he had little effect on my business. You see, I know how to get more alcohol out of a bushel of corn than anyone. And my success, I made money hand over fist, and it made families like the Hotchkiss family, the bankers, they were very happy. But it also brought others to the field. And by the time there were 12 distilleries in the city of Peoria, I grew tired of the business. And I sold to a man named Mr. Farrell for $200,000. And I retired a very wealthy man. Now, the land that my distillery was built on eventually became the home for the Great Western Distillery, and then Hiram Walker and Sons. Now, as you met George Bester, I too was a Lincoln supporter. And when Lincoln ran for the presidency in 1860, I put an advertisement in the paper that wagered $20,000 that he would win. And I had the money to back it up, too. After I retired, I moved to my 960-acre farm in East Peoria. It was magnificent. If you had visited in the 1880s, you would have heard the clattering of my 2 pet monkeys, and you would have heard the sounds from the peacocks that roamed about the land freely. I was so wealthy that I owned most of the land from East Peoria down to Pekin. My wife, Chloe, passed on in 1882. We had many adventures, and our biggest accomplishment, though, was our family. We had 8 children, but sadly, only 2 of them grew to an adult age, Johnson L. and Almiron. Of the other 6, the oldest was only 6 years and 3 months. They were initially buried at the Masonic Cemetery, but in 1873, they were moved here to the family plot. That 65-foot granite monument marks the location of our graves. I passed on in 1891 from typhoid pneumonia. You may go to my site now and see some grass growing over me. But I am proud to say that when I was alive, no grass ever grew under my feet.